Okay, in the last clip we'd seen how Cimon had lost control over the Delian League, and in his place he'd been taken by Pericles, and Pericles had been different to Cimon because he was definitely anti-Spartan and really didn't have any qualms about turning the Delian League into an Athenian Empire. Even despite Pericles' control, remember, Athens had established a number of dangerous trends which had allowed her to potentially take control of the Delian League and turn it into her own empire. So remember, all of the early arrangements benefited the Athenians, all of the early actions benefited the Athenians in some way or another, even legitimate actions like Aeon, for instance. Athens had shown that she was not afraid to force states into the Delian League, and remember, a really important point is that even after the complete destruction of a Persian fleet at Eurymedon, the Delian League had been kept by the Athenians, where it really showed her imperialist intentions. Now, the next sort of key event that we've got to talk about has some serious repercussions, and that's the Athenian attempt to liberate the Egyptians from Persian control. Now, remember, the Egyptians had been part of Persian Empire, even though the Persians were deeply unpopular, and Persia had faced numerous uprisings from the Egyptians. In line with the whole idea of ravaging the territory of their king, the Athenians had decided to try and liberate Egypt. So remember that the gains that Athens would have gained from that, the idea of grain and the wealth of Egypt as well. The key thing to remember about the Delian League attack on Egypt is that essentially it's a complete disaster. Even Thucydides, after dedicating a verse to it, says that most of the ships were lost, and this was the end of the great expedition made by Athens and her allies. So in short, remember that Egypt is legitimate, but do also remember that it's a complete disaster. It's quite a convenient disaster for the Athenians and also for Pericles, because his argument was that because the Delian League had been defeated so comprehensively in Egypt, that the Persians could potentially cause a threat to the League's treasury at Delos. It's all rather highly unlikely though, isn't it? What this really meant is that Pericles and the Athenians had an ideal excuse to hijack that League treasury and take it to Athens, which they did in 454 BC. Even more disturbingly, the same year, the Allied Congresses were stopped. That now meant that all of those Delian League allied states, the 150 plus, now had no say about where their money was being spent, how it was being spent, or anything about how the Delian League operated. Now, just to further underline Pericles' growing sort of control over the Delian League and turn it into an Athenian Empire, we've got to look at a particularly brutal act of imperialism, and that's the attack on Aegina, or as some people say, Aegina. Pericles had already referred to Aegina as the eyesore of the Piraeus. You can clearly see it from Athens, and basically it's shown sort of maybe that Athens was weak, that there was this one island that Athens could see from her own port that wasn't actually part of her empire. On top of that, Aegina was always sort of regarded as a bit of a Spartan sympathiser. The important thing is it's an unprovoked attack. Aegina had never been Persian, had never had a history of supporting the Persians. It had played a decisive role at the Battle of Salamis, so there was no argument for attacking Aegina. Aegina was brutally forced into the League. Not only was its fleet confiscated, its walls were torn down, it had to pay 30 talents a year. Now, unsurprisingly, this did provoke some type of reaction from Sparta, and we call that the Battle of Tanagra. Just be aware of that. It's more of a skirmish, a warm-up for the actual Peloponnesian War. But the Spartans do win, but because Sparta is involved with Athens because of its actions on Aegina, the Delian League is almost seen to be an anti-Spartan alliance. So let's sort of summarise everything up about Pericles' control over the Delian League. Oh, did I say Delian League? It's definitely an Athenian Empire under Pericles, isn't it? We've got all actions are all about increasing Athens' control and influence. League meetings completely scrapped. Treasury hijacked and taken from Apollo and given to Athena. What does Pericles do with this money? Well, everything that he spends the Delian League treasury on all benefits the Athenians. We have naval training. We've also got 20,000 Athenians employed in Athens' democracy as an attempt to solve the chronic unemployment issue. And the biggie, the headline grabber, has got to be the rebuilding of Athens and obviously the Parthenon, which is where the League's treasury is kept. The important thing you've got to ask about this is who is paying for all of this, and your answer is obviously the allies. Now, remember, not everyone in Athens necessarily agrees with how Pericles is spending this money. He certainly does have political opponents, and the political opponents accuse Pericles of dressing Athens up as a common whore. And Pericles' retort to this accusation is absolutely awesome, and you've got to make sure you know it for the exam, because it pretty much defines his attitude towards the Delian League. Not a ship, not a horse, not a hoplite, but simply money do the allies contribute. The idea that as long as Athens protects those allies from the Persians, Athens can do what it wants with the tribute money. The question you've got to ask yourself is, should those allies even still be paying that tribute money? So, in short, guys, what you can see is that this Delian League of equal states has become unquestionably an Athenian empire.